This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. For only the second time in about 3 years, Kenya's NSE 20 tripped its circuit breakers by falling by more than the daily limit of 5%. This did happen a little late in the trading day though, so trading stopped at about 1200 GMT. This has been a pretty volatile week for African equity markets. The top 40 in the JSE down over 15% in the last 5 trading sessions. Nigeria's main index not far behind, down 13.5%. The EGX 30 in that context is a bit of an outlier, falling by only 5.5% this week. Here's what's coming up tonight. COVID-19 cases in Africa are on the rise, markets are shaking, and major events are postponed. Ghana issues new regulations on car imports. And we'll be looking at the stimulus measures announced by the ECB in order to fight against COVID-19's economic damage. So then let's start with the intersection of healthcare and business. Let's start with how the COVID-19 outbreak is spreading right across the continent. As of now, there are 178 confirmed cases in 18 African countries. Ethiopia has reported its very first case of COVID-19 today. The health ministry says that the patient is a 48-year-old Japanese citizen who came to Ethiopia from Burkina Faso. Neighboring Kenya has also recorded its first case. The health ministry there said that the patient traveled back to Nairobi from the United States through London. Kenyan health officials have traced the house that the victim was staying with her 7 relatives. There are now 6 confirmed deaths from COVID-19 across the continent. Egypt still has the highest number of infections. The health ministry there has reported 13 new cases. The majority of confirmed COVID-19 cases are in North Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, most countries in that region have 2 or less confirmed cases so far. Now, trading at the Nairobi Securities Exchange was halted today after the NSE 20-share index fell by more than 5%. This came in the wake of the announcement of the first positive case of the coronavirus here in Kenya. Kenyan stocks hit an all-time low, with some actually showing virtually no demand. Kenya Power, for example, the utility company in this country, it hit a new low, 1 shilling 90 cents from Wednesday's 2 shilling and 10. The electricity generation company, Kengen, that dropped an all-time low of 4 shillings 70 cents. BAT Kenya, the cigarette maker, that went down from 400 to 395 shillings as well. BAT, remember, did close at about 466 shillings on Wednesday. Safaricom stocks, essentially the biggest component of the NSE, that was down by 6.5%, 24 shillings and 5 cents. In the banking sector, ABSA and cooperative banks saw absolutely no demand, with the latter in fact reaching the maximum allowable decline in the price of a stock, or essentially the limit down as they call it, having previously closed at 14 shillings and 60 cents on Thursday. Now, in the meantime, European stock indices are also recovering a little bit of ground after enormous falls early in the week, particularly on Thursday. As we mentioned, markets have been volatile pretty much the entire week as investors are trying to weigh and gauge the effect of this COVID-19 outbreak against measures that are aimed at easing the economic damage it will inevitably have. Shares across Asia Pacific, including Japan, Australia and India, they've all seen some major swings. And this comes after the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 in the United States saw their biggest one-day declines since 1987. In recent days, authorities around the world have announced a range of emergency measures, all designed to attempt to avoid a recession. On Friday, for example, the UK's Financial Conduct Authority prohibited short selling of a range of shares in Italian and Spanish firms after a request from authorities in those countries for the action, which is designed to protect those firms. Now, it's not all just about bonds and shares and commodities. Tanzania's tourism sector is also feeling the impact of this COVID-19 outbreak. Because of the outbreak, direct flights from the country's capital of Dar es Salaam to Guangzhou in China in both directions have been cancelled. Tourism promotion plans are also on ice. However, the Tourism Promotion Board in Tanzania is confident that this is a short-term disruption. Tourism is one of the main sectors in Tanzania's economy that it depends on for a lot of its growth. Recent statistics do point out to tourism as being a leading foreign currency earner, and it does contribute about 17% of the country's GDP.
Tourism is a major sector in Tanzania. And it is one of the leading sector that brings a lot of income to Tanzania. Right now, tourists are not comfortable to travel out of their countries. Some countries have put restrictions for people to travel out of their countries, and that will affect the global tourism industry. Tanzania being one of the key countries receiving quite a number of tourists from all over the world, definitely we will see numbers drop because of the outbreak.
All right, then. So we've covered essentially what happened in the markets, but what about the wider macroeconomic damage that we are likely to see to businesses, to jobs, to livelihoods? Let's explore all of that. Reginald Katutu is an economist at Zamara. It's an asset management company based in the Kenyan capital. He's with me in studio right now. Thank you for your time.
Yes, Ramah Nyang.
Okay, so the NSE trading halts today. We're down over 15% in about 12 weeks. But is this just a COVID-19 sell-off, or is there a more fundamental problem with the Kenyan market?
I think in the next couple of weeks, everything will be blamed on COVID. But if you notice, the Nairobi Stock Exchange has been on a downward trend most part of this year.
And most of last year as well.
Most of last year. It only went up last year in Q4 after the interest rate cap had come off, misconceptions in the market that banks are miraculously going to lend money in that last quarter and make a profit. And you know the transmission mechanism of even them lending out the money takes longer. So most people went into banking stocks, created that artificial demand, pushed banking stocks higher. Whenever someone is buying a stock, someone is selling, and the people that were selling were foreigners who were getting out of most of the tradable stocks in the country.
So for them it was a profit-taking opportunity.
Profit-taking and getting an exit out of the market. So if you look at the market now, KCB released their results. Their revenue is pretty much flat. If you don't include net bank revenue on them, the revenue might have actually dropped. So the reality of yes, we're getting into the reporting season where we should see most activity on the stocks. People are realizing that dividends are going to be flat. Most banking stocks are not going to record any double-digit growth. So what they went into, the conception of we're going to get a return when they announce results has all evaporated away. So people are literally just rebalancing their portfolios and moving on to other asset classes.
So then how, assuming that the at least the next 6 to 9 months are going to be pretty bleak, because the fact of the matter is the macro picture doesn't look particularly rosy. We've got the worst desert locust invasion in 7 decades, as it were. Incomes are likely to get a beating from this COVID-19 business. So consumer spending is definitely going to suffer. Insurance companies, of course, also exposed to the healthcare costs involved in dealing with this. Is there a way of trading this market route?
I think this point in time, you don't actually need traders, you need investors. When the market is going down, and the way it has gone down, and then it is historically down, the main question here right now is an issue of timing. When do I get into the market? And you're getting into the market for a long term.
But for example, is there value, at least broadly speaking, because the bulk of trading is usually just Safaricom or a handful of banking stocks. But beyond those guys, is there really any place to park your money?
You'll actually be shocked. For example, I'll give you an example of Unga.
Yeah.
Unga is pretty much as good as a monopoly as Kenya Power. People use Unga products. People have to eat at the end of the day. COVID or no COVID, people still need to eat. So when people buy stocks, my advice is always buy the company, buy the growth trajectory in that industry. So that's why Safaricom remains a darling, because they are pretty much profitable. Everyone will continue using airtime, and there's no competition that seems like it's
M-Pesa as well.
Exactly, and there's no competition that seems like it's going to come anytime soon. So they will remain a good growth stock. But will it make you money in a month, 2 months? No. For example, the guys who bought Safaricom at 2 shillings 50 cents 9 years ago or 8 years ago, we're smiling all the way to the bank. That's 1,000% return. Where are you going to get that anyway? But patience paid. So anyone who's getting into the market now, which will be the best time to get into the market, is look for the right stock in the right industry, definitely with the right management, because we have Kenya Power, which is supposed to be a monopoly, but it's useless management and all corruption and stuff like that.
Center.
So yeah, it's not looking good for the NSE. If what happened today happens again on Monday and Tuesday, we might actually break the 2,000 mark, which will be catastrophic.
Which would be rather interesting, because that takes us all the way back to the early 2002 levels.
Exactly.
So the macro side of it is also particularly interesting, because this is definitely going to have, the COVID-19 outbreak that is, this will definitely have an impact on people's ability to work. It'll have an impact on their earning power. It'll have an impact on company revenues. It looks like a prime opportunity for some kind of stimulus. What would you propose?
Unfortunately, the government is caught in a very hard place. Personally, themselves are broke. They've not been meeting their tax revenues. They have debt payments which are still coming due. Do they actually have capacity for a stimulus? I doubt they actually do, unless they print money. They have been printing anyway, but unless they print money, even the printing.
Why not do it through a tax cut?
It's difficult. Like August is coming, and they have to pay back the interest payment for Eurobond. Their treasury bills and bonds, the majority of them are maturing sometime this year and early next year. A tax cut will just hit the only source of revenue that they have to actually repay this debt.
But the flip side of that argument is the fact that you're looking at lower growth, low investment, lower spending. Why not just give people essentially more money to spend in their pocket?
But they have been doing that, or they have been trying to do that, using the central bank. Because when the central bank buys dollars from government, goes borrows on the Eurobond market, gets the dollars, central bank buys those dollars. Our reserves are not kept in shillings. Our reserves are kept in foreign currency. So whenever central bank buys dollars, just generally just printing money. And they've been doing that for the last 1 year, 2 years. We've not seen that impact in the economy. The money has not trickled down to where it is supposed to go. Because we need to understand the structure of the Kenyan economy, or structure of the Kenyan financial aspect side of it. If you look at the demographics, if you look at the difference between the formal and the informal sector, so you find you're giving a tax cut, and that will only affect 2 million people out of 47, because they're the ones that were actually employed. And if you look at the employment numbers, only 79,000 people earn over 100K, over 100,000 shillings. The majority of people actually earn less than 50,000 shillings.
So for them, a tax cut won't actually be beneficial.
It won't actually help them in any way. So right now, the government is in a place where tax cut, MPC meets, cuts the rate, will literally have no impact on the economy. I think what the government needs to put all their energy in is make sure that this thing does not become a pandemic inside the country.
Right.
Stop it from spreading.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Reginald Kitutu from Zamara, thank you very much. Much appreciated. All right then, more stories coming your way, this time from across the Atlantic. Brussels has fired back at a US travel ban that targets European travelers from about 26 countries. It says that the COVID-19 pandemic is a global crisis that requires cooperation, not unilateral action. In a shock announcement early in the week, President Donald Trump blamed Europe for America's coronavirus woes. He says that the region failed to take strong and decisive enough action to stop this deadly virus from spreading. Here's Tony Waterman with more.
The response from Brussels was a far cry from the fiery rhetoric so often used by the U.S. president, and some have even questioned if it was actually strong enough. In a joint statement, the Commission and Council presidents said, quote, "The European Union disapproves of the fact that the U.S. decision to impose a travel ban was taken unilaterally and without consultation." But Mr. Trump was far more accusatory when he made the shock announcement on Wednesday night. During that televised address from the Oval Office, he placed the blame at Europe's doorstep, saying that it had failed to take the same actions as the U.S. did when it halted travel from China, and that now, as a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. Mr. Trump also said that all goods would be included in this ban, but the White House quickly corrected that mistake. The restrictions will not apply to cargo. But to say the very least, this announcement has taken many here in Brussels by surprise. In a tweet this morning, Council President Charles Michel said European officials needed to assess the situation and that economic disruption must be avoided. But there is little hope that that can actually happen because this travel ban will be in place for 30 days, which is a significant period of time for businesses. And Europe is already grappling with the economic repercussions of this outbreak. It's losing at least €1 billion every single month in tourism receipts. A number of European airlines are in near collapse. And consumers are avoiding, and in some places they've been outright banned from going to shops and restaurants. And there are growing concerns that COVID-19 will tip, at the very least, Germany and Italy into recession and perhaps even the wider bloc. So certainly this ban from the United States is just piling on to what already is a rather dire economic situation in Europe. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
All right, then. So that is the view from Brussels. But what about the view from the United States? Dan Williams is in Chicago tonight. He's got the latest, and he actually joins us now live from that very city. Dan, good to see you. So give us a sense of what air travel is like at the moment in the United States. Are we seeing a decline in domestic and international travel continue, or has that stabilized?
Yeah, we're seeing a huge decline. Over the course of the last week or so, we've seen a real cutback on domestic travel, certainly with corporate America essentially only traveling on essential journeys, being shied away from having to travel unless they absolutely need to. And of course, we're also now seeing that very much knock-on effect as well with public domestic holiday travel footfall as well, where again, a real nervousness around COVID-19 as this crisis continues to deepen, and more cases, of course, of the virus being found across the United States. And then, of course, added to that, we have, as we were just hearing here now, this travel ban to 26 countries in Europe, and that, of course, compounding the issues. And, of course, for the airlines and for the airport industry as a whole here, that really compounding, of course, what has already been in place, those fears, of course, manifesting itself. It has to be said right now, we're in the departure area. It's a lot quieter, it has to be said, than normal, just down in the departure, in the arrival area as well. Certainly not the scenes that we were seeing in Europe of passengers scrambling to get on planes ahead of this travel ban coming into effect, but there really is a real nervousness, if you like, around the industry as people simply decide to put off any non-essential travel while this ban and while this virus continues to take hold here.
Indeed, and the knock-on effects are massive. Boeing shares, for example, down nearly 50% so far this year. Between it and the large carriers in the United States like Southwest, United Airlines, and all their shares are deep in the red by double digits at this point. What is their outlook on how this outbreak will affect their respective businesses as less people fly and they end up mothballing a lot of their fleets?
That's right. We've already seen with this, obviously, this kind of lack of demand suddenly of airlines grounding huge numbers of their fleets. We have yet to really hear too much in terms of from the likes of United and American Airlines and others here. But certainly, to paint a picture, we've seen from British Airways the pretty dire forecast that they're suggesting going forward in terms of cutbacks in jobs in the short and potentially long term as well. They're suggesting that they haven't seen a crisis like this since 9/11. So there's no doubt that as they work through this travel ban, as they work through this lesser demand on domestic and international flights, as they completely rip up their whole transatlantic planning in order to try and accommodate the short term, the longer term as well. Of course, there is a huge question mark. We simply don't know how long this pandemic will continue and how long that will continue to affect people's confidence in long and short haul travel. So without doubt, huge question marks for the airline industry, especially, of course, the tourism sector as a whole, amongst other companies too, and other sectors. But certainly for the travel industry, for the airline industry, huge questions going forward from here.
Indeed, of course, including the big one of how fast incomes will recover in the aftermath of this outbreak. Dan Williams in Chicago, thank you very much. Now let's get back to the continent. Algeria is preparing to launch an international initiative that will try and restore some stability to the oil market. Algeria's energy ministry says it will be tracking the course of oil prices and all key developments in the oil market which are affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. Algeria has held consultations and contacts with oil producing and consuming countries, and they're trying to restore stability and raise oil prices. The country's energy minister, Mohamed Akab, called on the OPEC member states and their allies to a meeting of experts or the Joint Technical Committee to analyze current market conditions. Now, the oil sector, as you might have heard from that conversation with Dan, is facing a double shock in the field of supply, because there's a lot of it coming in from Saudi Arabia and Russia, and demand as well, which has been cut by COVID-19.
Algeria will not remain indifferent in the face of the recent developments of oil prices in the world markets. We will work to bridge the points of view and strengthen the strategies among the countries concerned.
The situation is troubling for Algeria and many countries. The decline in oil prices in the world markets has many causes, but the important thing is the results of this serious and disturbing price deterioration. Is Algeria going to succeed in its endeavor to bring the views of the producers and actors in the international petroleum markets closer? I think that at some stage and in critical situation, everyone will search for a meeting point and convergence, and this is what Algeria should work to accelerate.
Welcome back. Let's run through some company headlines. Starting in the energy sector, shares in Sasol, the South African petrochemicals giant, rose by as much as 50% on Friday, on track to snap a 7-session losing streak. This came a day after the synthetic fuel maker said it was working on measures to address pressure on its balance sheet. Sasol's share price is still over 75% lower compared to its position at the start of the week. It's been battered by an oil price crash and concern about the amount of debt it's carrying on its books. In Kenya, National Bank posted a $2.9 million net loss in the fiscal year ending on the 31st of December, as compared to the little over $68,000 net profit booked in the previous year. Now, the bank was acquired by Kenya's largest bank, partially owned by the government, KCB Group, in the third quarter of 2019. It's a move that saw KCB sink in nearly $50 million in capital into the financially distressed lender. In 2019, National Bank posted a 1% improvement in its interest earnings to $87.5 million. Non-interest income improved by 5%. Microsoft has, through its Microsoft for Startups initiative, has launched a global social entrepreneurship program. It seeks to build and scale up underrepresented founders with diverse perspectives and backgrounds. Successful applicants will get free access to the firm's cloud tech, up to $120,000 worth of Azure credits, and technical support and guidance. And Amazon workers can take unlimited sick leave this month, but only those in quarantine for the COVID-19 virus will be entitled to extra sick pay. Some workers also say that they're being told to increase their hours, which is known as mandatory extra time, because of increased demand and staff shortages. Amazon has also established a $25 million fund to support independent delivery service partners and their drivers, Amazon Flex participants, and seasonal employees who are under financial distress. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore the new regulations on the second-hand car imports in Ghana when we come back. We'll also look at the latest chapter in Zimbabwe's long-running land reform program when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But
beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
All right then, with the ongoing COVID-19 threat, buying a ticket to just about any upcoming event is a pretty unsettling experience. You're not actually sure if what you're buying or paying for will be there in another week or so. Cancellations of events has grown increasingly frequent in recent days. Global events like the Australian Formula One Grand Prix have now been affected. Now, governments are working to tackle the spread by flagging the prospect of bans on mass gatherings. So where exactly do you stand after cancellations, and what sort of legal issues might you run into? Let's explore that in a bit more detail. Elizabeth Lenjo is a Kenyan advocate at the High Court. She's with me in studio right now. This is, I guess, going to be a bit like legal class 101, because a couple of terms that we keep hearing coming up over and over again. Force majeure, what is it and how does it apply to public health emergencies?
So force majeure is a clause that is provided in any contract. So for it to come in effect, it must be provided in a contract. And we're talking about what we call acts of God, quote unquote.
That's tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It could even cover issues of war, anything unforeseeable that is not in control of the contracting parties, and there is no way that they can foresee it. Yeah.
So does a public health emergency of this nature, does that fall under that definition?
Ideally, it should, but if it's not provided in a contract, then maybe we'd explore other ways of trying to cancel or invalidate a contract. So we'd probably be talking about frustration.
Right, that's the other phrase that keeps coming up, frustration, because it's, as I understand it, it's a legal doctrine where one party to a contract is not able to meet their terms, their side of that contract, for reasons beyond their control.
Exactly, and it means that the performance of the contract would end up, the result being what was not envisioned in a contract. So it definitely changes the nature of the contract and the subject matter, so then it can actually be invalidated. But this is subject to a court, right? So it's not something that
so it's not
parties
that I can't just declare force majeure and that's it.
Yeah, you cannot.
The other party to the contract has legal recourse.
Exactly. It's the same thing with frustration as well. It's left to the courts to interpret, and what then they will do is, in the event of a force majeure clause, they would be assessing to what extent. Because a force majeure clause also, you have to be very specific. So you cannot be too blanket. When you're too blanket, then it can be challenged. Yeah.
So, because ultimately this, the weird part about this is how then does this have ripple effects down the line? So for instance, like in the last 72 hours, even today, for instance, the London Marathon completely cancelled. The Australian GP cancelled literally just before first practice started. But if you're then asking, say for instance, someone who's paid for access to the streaming service for Formula One in a completely different market, and yet Formula One is saying, look, it's not our problem, we can't give you a race because we've suspended the race. Can someone on this end of the world then turn around and say, well, okay, you're not meeting your obligations, give me my money back?
They could try, but then how do you try? What is the mechanism? Yeah. Then in this situation, we're talking about also conflict of laws. So then are you going to sue under, Abu Dhabi, Qatari laws or Kenyan laws? Like it becomes a whole new situation,
and
right?
because supply chains are so interconnected across the world, that becomes even more problematic.
Exactly, yeah. Right. With the digital age, things are very unpredictable.
Okay, so moving forward though, because this also does have implications on how companies treat employees, right? Because if I can't provide a service, that means money's not coming through the door. What then changes as far as my obligations to my employees are concerned? Because just looking at Kenyan employment law, for instance, we're only entitled to 7 days of sick leave in a 12-month window at full pay, another 7 days at half pay. But this is a situation where people could be in hospital for weeks, months. How do systems cope with a pandemic like this?
I think we need to figure out a better way, because when you look at countries like Mauritius, for example, very monsoon prone, but they have infrastructure in terms of policy to make sure then the employees are well compensated and they figure out how they will work offline or online, depending on the situation. So we need to be more robust with our laws. When we look at the last 10 years, there's been an epidemic here and there, it's either been SARS or Ebola, right? So I think we're at that place where we now really need to be very deliberate with our laws.
Because historically, Kenya hasn't had an epidemic, so we've never really had to prep for any of this.
Yeah, but you see, with our interaction with the international community, it's time for us to start being more pragmatic with how we approach the law.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Liz Lenjo, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. All right, then, let's move on to West Africa. Lawmakers in Ghana are debating a ban on the importation of second-hand vehicles that are more than 10 years old. The government there also plans to amend a customs law to include the ban on importation of salvaged or crashed cars. The idea here is to create a domestic market for a range of car giants, including Volkswagen and Toyota, both of which have set up assembly plants in Ghana. Local dealers, however, they're not very happy. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai explains why from Accra.
Roland Asian imports cars from Europe and the US that have been in accident. He then repairs and sells them. He says his business will be affected by a ban on the import of second-hand and crashed vehicles.
We are about around 50,000 that we do this business. And the people that follow us, they are numerous. One, the dealers is going to affect us. And it's going to affect the agents that they harbor to clear those cars and their boys. And those towing cars that, take these cars to their various mechanic shop where they're going to face it. And it's going to affect the mechanics.
Many Ghanaians heavily depend on second-hand vehicles because they are cheaper. The Ghana Revenue Authority estimates that an average of 100,000 cars are imported into the country annually. 80% of them are second-hand. Last year, the government adopted a policy to encourage foreign automobile companies to build car parts in Ghana. Under that policy, legislation is being amended to ban the import of second-hand vehicles more than 10 years old, but not everybody supports the move.
The first concern that we raised was that it was important for government to devise a new incentive and investment regime and a regulatory framework for the industry, so that anybody coming in knows that he's coming under this particular regime. You don't go and amend the Customs Act to provide for them.
The government says the policy will create jobs and reduce the imports of unwanted vehicles.
The government estimates it will lose $145 million over the next 3 years after the implementation of the policy, but it expects the loss to be partly offset by the additional revenue from customs duties on vehicles not covered under the program.
Legislators say that's too high a price and want the amended bill to be withdrawn.
If you do a cost-benefit analysis, it gives you the impression that we will be sacrificing a lot of jobs for this investment.
No date has been set for the ban to take effect. Roland Asian hopes there is still time to reconsider so people like him stay in business. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to Zimbabwe now. It's now moving to undo the controversial land reform program it implemented 2 decades ago. The government has gazetted new legislation under which former landowners may opt for repossession or cash compensation instead. These new regulations apply to both indigenous farmers whose farms were appropriated as well as those whose land was protected by bilateral treaties. Here's CGTN's Farai Mukutia with more from Harare.
Several black farmers who lost their land amidst some of the chaotic fast-track land grabs are to be reinstated on their farms or compensated, as are several white farmers who were protected by international treaties.
And Zimbabwe did sign those BIPAs, the bilateral investment protection agreements with the Netherlands, Germany. There's quite a few countries. And yet, some of those BIPA farms were compulsorily acquired. So the government is now saying that was an error. That land should not have been compulsorily acquired because it was protected by an existing agreement. So that land would have to be compensated for. I don't know whether some of them it may be difficult to actually have the original land back, but certainly compensation will be due.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government has said there is no going back on the land reform. It set aside funds to pay former white farmers for improvements they made on the land. The plan to compensate owners of erroneously acquired land is seen as yet another step by the government to rebuild international relations at a time the country is trying to boost its agricultural output. In February, it announced plans to reduce farm sizes so as to free up land for more beneficiaries and improve productivity. The measures are also a response to years of sustained economic challenges that have led to high unemployment.
A country or economy is labor surplus. Farmers will get smaller. It's only when an economy now absorbs that labor into a manufacturing industrial economy that you suck the people out of the rural areas. The farms get bigger, then you don't have to subdivide them, you actually consolidate.
After an initial slump following the land reforms, Zimbabwe's agricultural sector had been on an upward trajectory that's recently been interrupted by 2 consecutive droughts which have slashed harvests, leaving millions food insecure. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Zambia's power supply deficit has gone up by nearly 20% to 810 megawatts from 690 megawatts back in September. Now, that deficit is being attributed to a shortfall of water at the Kariba Dam, which is currently 12% full compared to 43% last year. This comes after deal to import 300 megawatts of generation capacity from South Africa's Eskom expired, and that deal is not being renewed. Now, to combat drought-induced electricity shortages, Zambia's government has implemented a range of measures, including massive price hikes and fast-tracking support for green energy projects. However, ZESCO, the country's utility, still relies very heavily on short-term imports from the Southern African power pool in order to plug that supply deficit. Egypt will start printing polymer banknotes in a move expected to save money in the long run. Now, the new banknotes are expected to last much longer than the current paper currency. The Central Bank of Egypt says it will print these plastic notes at its new facility in the administrative capital near Cairo. Here's CGTN's Adel El Marouki with the details.
For years, the IMF has been saying the future of banknotes is plastic, but few countries have opted for the new currency. This week, Egypt has confirmed that it will join those nations that have gone for the option.
There's a global trend to replace paper banknotes with plastic. This convergence leads to many benefits. They are easier in recycling, so it's environmental friendly. It's more expensive to print, but it has a much longer lifespan. Also, the probability of forging it is much lower than paper banknotes.
The Central Bank of Egypt expects the cycle of its new banknotes to be triple that of paper. After some studies, the CBE is settled to begin with the £10 note. It's roughly worth 64 US cents.
The £10 note is the least monetary unit that the government can print. Less values can be covered by coins. The £10 note is also the most common in the market. It represents the highest volume of printed money under the £100 note. The 10 banknote is only the first stage. The other notes will follow in a timeline, which the central bank will announce after the launch of the new note.
Besides being harder to counterfeit, polymer banknotes have a major economic benefit. The Central Bank of Egypt will eventually print its currency fewer times, saving the foreign currency used to import raw material for its press. And the polymer notes have a lower risk of transmitting disease, leading to reduced health costs.
On a rainy day, the new Egyptian £10 will definitely be more practical than this old one. The Central Bank of Egypt says it will start printing this new note by the end of the year. It will be printed at its new facility in the new administrative capital. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at the European Central Bank's stimulus measures in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread, e-commerce is spreading widely. We'll show you how next. Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Ucheopo while reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The European Central Bank barely 24 hours ago decided to not cut interest rates despite market expectations for a reduction amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. But the ECB did announce something else, measures designed to support bank lending. It also expanded its bond buying program by about $135 billion. Here's CGTN's Iris Spitzer from Frankfurt.
A continent in crisis. The coronavirus pandemic has shaken European markets, restricted travel, and slowed commerce. Under pressure to respond, the European Central Bank announced emergency measures at the close of its two-day meeting at its Frankfurt headquarters.
Together with the substantial monetary policy stimulus already in place, these measures will support liquidity and funding conditions for households, businesses, and banks.
The new measures are designed to shore up lending to local banks through the central bank's longer-term refinancing operations programs. That could help counter the economic impact of the virus in hard-hit regions like Italy. The bank also expanded its asset purchasing program. Both the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Bank of England this week cut interest rates in response to the impact of the coronavirus.
While the ECB's new measures are expected to have an impact, the bank's policy-making tools are currently seen as limited compared to banks like the U.S. Federal Reserve. Europe's central bank has continually cut interest rates since the financial crisis of 2008, and some are currently below zero.
There are already concerns, especially in Europe's largest economy, Germany, about the ECB's existing stimulus measures, particularly its massive bond buying program.
Before Corona, there was already a discussion about the negative side effects of this very loose monetary policy. Therefore, I think measures of the ECB are more symbolic.
Well, the ECB revised its Eurozone growth forecast for the year down to 0.8% from 1.1% given the circumstances. There are still hopes that the underlying fundamentals are on solid footing.
I think we go through a difficult period of half a year, and thereafter the economy should recover and return to the old growth path.
But with the virus spreading rapidly, and now the U.S. ban on most travel from Europe, the situation is highly uncertain. The global health crisis threatens to turn into a full-blown financial crisis.
China's central bank says it will also be cutting the cash that banks must hold as reserves at the PBOC by anywhere between 50 to 100 basis points. Joint stock banks get an additional reduction of another 100 basis points. Together, the idea is that these cuts should release at least $79 billion of liquidity into the market. Now, this is the second time this year the People's Bank of China has made such a move. It's injecting funds, essentially, into the world's second largest economy at a time when global policymakers are racing to head off the macroeconomic damage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Analysts do expect that China's economic growth will fall to about 3.5% this year in the first quarter alone. Some, in fact, believe it may have shrank on a quarter-on-quarter basis. British logistics companies are also suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic as it continues to spread. Logistics company Davies Turner has been stalled due to trucking restrictions in China and factory closures in the country. But as CGTN's Nawi Jabakil now explores, the firm has figured out a way to restart its enterprise.
On a normal day, these lanes are usually full of trucks, bringing in goods and taking them out. But here on the outskirts of London, one of the UK's biggest logistics firms says it's seen a fall in trade recently. Davies Turner runs the only dedicated rail service for goods from China to the UK, one that's been halted because of the coronavirus.
We anticipated the service would be suspended due to the Chinese New Year. That was really a 3-week break, but in view of the coronavirus and the closure of Wuhan terminal, and in addition to that, the trucking restrictions in China and the factory closures, we delayed the service for a further 3 weeks.
The normal weekly train service started in the Chinese city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak. It then moved through Kazakhstan into Russia and Belarus before stopping off in Poland and ending its journey in the German city of Duisburg. From there, the goods are trucked to the Netherlands before ending by road in the UK. The average journey time takes about 22 days, with Davies Turner claiming it's up to 70% cheaper than air freight and up to 21 days quicker than shipping.
This firm estimates the 3-week suspension of the rail link has cost it around $100,000. The wider impact is significantly higher given the other companies that rely on the service. But like many businesses affected by the coronavirus, it is finding a workaround. The rail link will be up and running again on March 13th, but instead of departing from Wuhan, it'll now set off from Xi'an.
The commodities on board range from machinery parts to automotive spares and fashion goods. And across the UK, businesses are scrambling to restart and maintain their supply chains.
In the last couple of weeks, we've seen a significant increase in the number of inquiries, and also, bearing in mind we've only been taking bookings for the last 10 days, a significant increase in bookings too. So we expect that to continue in the coming weeks.
By land, air or sea, COVID-19 has sent shockwaves throughout global trade. And for many businesses, reducing its impact depends on getting their goods moving once again. Nawi Jabakil, CGTN, Dartford in England.
Now, this COVID-19 pandemic has pushed many businesses to expand their enterprise online. And some of them are not exactly what you'd expect. Furniture shopping, for example. The world's leading home furnishings retailer, IKEA, has opened its first online store. That's our focus on What's Hot tonight.
All of IKEA's 30 stores on the Chinese mainland closed on January the 30th and didn't reopen until last week when some gradually resumed business. As of this Monday, nearly half the company's brick-and-mortar stores have reopened, but in the meantime, there's been a big change. Though the timing was coincidental, the company chose this week to open its first online furniture and home furnishing store on the third-party platform. They think it's perfect for the China market.
Non-brick-and-mortar store is one component of the transformation, which we would like to leverage and be accessible to the more Chinese customers. We have announced here 1.8 billion RMB investment for our business in China, so China market remains our main strategic market for IKEA.
The virtual store makes Tmall the first and only third-party marketplace to offer products and home furnishing solutions outside of IKEA's physical stores and the company's own digital channels. It will offer about 3,800 products, about 40% of everything IKEA makes. It's now available to users in Shanghai, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Anhui, and in less than half an hour after opening, it had attracted more than 70,000 followers.
IKEA has a large user base in China's major cities, and Alibaba's retail sectors, especially Tmall, has a large number of active young users. We want to share our customers so that both companies win.
IKEA's move follows that of several domestic furnishing companies like Macalline and Easy Home, which have started selling furniture online, but it turns out not to be an easy move. The younger generation is now beginning to take over the market. A Tencent report on furniture sales last year said 62% of the buyers are now aged between 20 and 40. The question is, however, whether even the young buyers will be willing to purchase furniture online.
I'll first go to physical store, have a look at what's available. If I find something I like, I'll buy it online. That way I don't need to carry it home myself.
Online, I mainly take a look at the overall styles. I prefer go to a physical store myself to get a look and feel for the size and the appearance of things. After that, I make my purchase decision.
Shopping offline gives me a better experience. Most of what we see online is just pictures, which seem pretty vague to me.
Experts say there is still room for furniture companies to expand their markets online, however, though so far only 10% of them have done so. Effective marketing may take more than just photographs on the website.
Furniture companies should have breakthrough in technology to ensure that what customers get is the same as they see online. Technologies now available, like high-definition screens and video display, cannot vividly showcase a product's color, texture, and size, so they should focus more on the application of VR and 3D customization to embrace further explosive growth.
Zhang says the way for furnishing companies to take advantage of online sales is by providing more customized products and solutions to online customers. According to statistics provided by industry investigator Forward, the value of China's furniture industry reached 2.23 trillion yuan in 2018, and that number is expected to reach 3 trillion this year. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So gold's rally from January into February hasn't just lost steam, it's actually decisively turned the other way around. Gold futures at about 1522 an ounce at 1700 GMT, with today's 3.4% drop. In fact, they're on course for the worst weekly decline since 2011, according to Bloomberg data. Now, Brent has remained within a very narrow $2 band so far today, $33.88. It's $47 in the red. We're also seeing other Gulf producers following Saudi Arabia's lead. We're seeing discounts on offer from Abu Dhabi's Mubin crude in effect for delivery from April. Here's what's coming up next. When we come back, we'll introduce you to a Nigerian startup that's bringing virtual reality into the classroom. Welcome back to the program. When I mention virtual reality, it's gaming probably that will first come to mind, especially with the release this month of Half-Life Alyx. But it's being applied in different places as well. A Nigerian startup has now started to introduce it to the classroom. This is part of a broader range of efforts to improve the quality of education and ensure emerging tech takes a firm hold in Nigeria and Africa. CGTN's Deji Banwas has that story on Grassroots.
Imisi 3D is an extended reality creation lab based in a suburb of Lagos, locally regarded as the city's Silicon Valley. Founded by Judith Okonkwo in 2016, the tech startup broadens access to the XR technology by growing a community of content creators and educating people about it through a touch and feel approach. Imisi 3D's solution is particularly focused on working in specific important sectors such as education. The whole idea is to provide innovative education content through virtual reality, which will improve experiential learning for students with limited access to study aids.
If you go to a local public school, you'll easily have 80, 90 children in one classroom. They might not have laboratories, for example, for the sciences. It certainly means that they will not be able to afford going to field trips, in different parts of the country or the world. However, with a technology like virtual reality, you can set up a VR lab in the school. So you can have students do experiments in a virtual lab. You can have them do things like explore the pyramids of Egypt, or see the Eiffel Tower, all in VR.
With a computer, VAR headset, and camera, The VR experience creates a supplement to classroom teaching. The tech company has been working closely with a local secondary school in Lagos to get schools and students embrace the technology.
They can explore the solar system, so it's not just this abstract concept they're hearing about, but they can actually see the planets and manipulate them. They can be in the human body and like move the human heart, like things like that.
Already, the tech startup has been able to create custom content for the Nigerian junior secondary school curriculum in 3 subjects, courtesy of support from the UNICEF Innovation Fund. Over the past year, Okonkwo and her team have been able to record tremendous successes with the technologies, particularly in the area of storytelling.
In the Forbes list of the best XR experiences of 2019, there were 2 Nigerian VR film projects, one of which was produced here. So we're seeing significant wins with the little that we've been able to do. I think we expect to see a lot more. If we get the uptake that we should have, if we have the right content, it will literally change education as we know it.
In most cases, the company has to provide required facilities for students by themselves. And this is one area that Okonkwo wants policy drivers to pay attention to.
One thing that has been obvious for the last few years is that, the XR technologies are severely under-resourced in Africa. In setting up a space that we would use as a lab, we had to provide alternate power supply. We certainly had to make sure that there were places where we could have access to things like the internet for the headsets to update them when we needed to. And for us, that typically means bringing them back to the lab here to get that done.
The XR technology holds a lot of potential for education in Nigeria. For this reason, MEC 3D also invests in building local content creators through scholarship offers and support for enthusiasts who are looking to start a career in augmented and virtual reality or the emerging technologies. But it will need a lot of push to make VR a common reality in every classroom in the country. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
One last story for you, this time from Tanzania, where Dar es Salaam's Innovation Week has kicked off. It's a series of events exploring innovation in research, entrepreneurship, tech and design. The idea is to try and inspire current and future business leaders to take risks on new ideas if they are to transform East Africa's economy. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo.
Themed Innovate for Impact, this year's theme has brought together over 6,000 participants countrywide. Started 5 years ago, this time around, Innovation Week will not just be in Dar es Salaam region, but also Arusha, Iringa, Zanzibar, Dodoma and Mbeya. The government now says it will continue to support Innovation Week because it is at the core of its industrial drive.
Local innovations are very important. We cannot, try to achieve an industrialization agenda based on borrowed technology only.
There will be over 70 events happening throughout the week, ranging from discussions, hackathons, workshops, panel discussions, demonstrations and more. The organizers believe that events like these help connecting innovators to other financial sources and support them to become sustainable. But he says more needs to be done to support local innovators.
So what we need to work on right now is basically to have the policymakers understand how they can be able to support innovation through some kind of innovation-friendly policy framework.
Tanzania's second 5-year development plan stresses on industrialization as a catalyst to achieving middle-income economy. So it's hoped that events like these can be the right engine to make that a reality. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
All right, then, a quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. So the rand has been among the worst hit currencies that we track on the program this year, down about 16% so far in 2020. But that slide had paused for a moment today with a 1.6% gain. The Kenyan shilling, Nigeria's naira, they've barely moved so far in the year, but we're seeing the Egyptian pound giving up some of the gains it made until the middle of February. From the 24th of Feb, it's eased by about 9/10 against the American dollar. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. We'd always like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your feedback back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.